Some of them think it's old-fashioned. Some of them even think it's right-wing. In any case, most of my colleagues think that this subject is not really worthy of contemplation for a serious designer. And I'll try to spend the next hour or so hopingly proving to you that this kind of thinking is not just wrong, but also stupid. We'll give it a very good shot of answering this question, why we as designers very much should be interested in it, and I'll right now start to talk about this. This is basically the single worst thing that ever happened to design. It was never said by a smart scientist. It did not come out of carefully conducted research. It was a quote from a 19th century romantic comedy. And for one reason or another, it infested our brains. And the good news on that part is, it is not true. Beauty is not in the eye of the beholder. There is a surprisingly vast agreement around the world, throughout different cultures, of what we think of as being beautiful and what is not. And I will try to prove it to you right now. We have 5 shapes. Which of these shapes do you think is the most beautiful? Who votes for the square? Square, anybody? 1, 2, 3 people. Who votes for the circle? A lot of people. I would say sort of like over 50%. The triangle. 20. The rectangle. 1, 2. The wiggly shape. Also quite a lot. So we very clearly have a winner in the circle, a number 2 in the wiggly shape, and I think last came the rectangle. I can show you how fast I am in my PowerPoint presentation, because here is how you voted. I've done this in Cape Town, South Africa. I've done it in Tokyo, Japan. I've done it in Oslo, Sweden, and I've done it in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. The results are always the same. Everybody loves the circle, everybody hates the rectangle. Let's look at this in colors. Who thinks red is the most beautiful color? 25. Blue. Lots of people. Green. 15. Brown. 1 person for brown. Yellow. Quite a lot of people, about 30 or 40. And purple. A little bit less, 30 or so. Okay, so we have a very clear winner in blue, a very clear loser in brown. But of course, I knew that because everybody around the world agrees with you, blue is the favorite color of the world. This is just not the result of my own surveys. This is the result of what we looked at with 6,000 participants around the world on social media. This is what other independent scientific surveys had come up with. Blue is the world's favorite color, very much likely to be explained through our prehistoric ancestors who thought of the sky. When the sky was blue, it was a safe sky. When the sea was blue, it was a safe sea. They felt secure in it, and that probably came back, was delivered all the way to us. So what we can tell, what we can say is the ugliest thing around the world, everybody hates this. The a brown rectangle. It's extremely improper. What do my colleagues in architecture learn from this? Now, I actually first started to think about this subject right here in Lisbon. I did what I'm doing right now. I gave a talk at a conference, and parts of that conference were also taking place in that castle, St. George, above Lisbon. And I was thinking about that. A castle, as you all know, is a very functional building. It's a military building, basically created to shoot cannonballs at enemies. And I don't have to tell you, in the case of your castle, I would say it's a pretty good-looking castle. If you look at the entrance, it's perfectly symmetrical. If you go inside, every doorknob has been covered with ornaments, and even the murderous instruments themselves, the cannons, have clearly been designed with some sort of aesthetics in mind. These rings on that cannon have no function. Somebody put them on there because they thought, if we're gonna kill those fuckers, let's at least murder them with some good-looking stuff. Like we owe them that much. It would be a crime to kill them with stuff that's not good-looking. Right from Lisbon, I took a flight to Memphis, Tennessee, and there I spoke at the Cook Convention Center. And I went outside and I looked left and right and up and down, and I would say that a reasonable person would conclude that no aesthetics played a role in building the Cook Convention Center whatsoever. This is pure functionality. They needed a large hall to gather, and they built it, but the way this whole thing looked really didn't really enter the discussions. If you go inside the Cook Convention Center, the very considerable music history that is part of Memphis, you have Stax Records, you have Elvis Presley and so on, has now been stamped in this incredibly awful ugly carpet. You see sort of some musical keys here, some guitar strings here. That's what's left over from the music culture of Memphis, Tennessee. So again, I think you could say that Elvis had left that building a very, very long time ago. And the question, of course, was how did this happen? How did we go from supposedly the dark Middle Ages of Portugal, they're always described not as very humanitarian, to the very, very clearer, much darker places of roughly 1970s Midwest United States of America. And I tended to blame a single guy for this. An Austrian, a fellow Austrian architect who lived in the later part of the 19th century, who was born in the later part of the 19th century, a guy called Adolf Loos. Now, Adolf Loos was born into Vienna when Vienna was extremely powerful. You had the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, and because it was powerful, it had a lot of money, and there was a lot of building activities going on. The main boulevards, the Ringstraße, were built in the youth of Adolf Loos's time, and you had things like this, the Vienna State Opera, built in fake Renaissance style. You had the mayor's house, the city hall, built in fake Gothic style, and you had the Austrian parliament built in fake Greek style. And of course, a contemporary architect like Adolf Loos hated that. He thought that his time would deserve its own visual representation, its own visual language. If you think about it, during that time, the Industrial Revolution was taking place. Machines were brought in. Adolf Loos thought this stuff needs to be visualized. This stuff has to find reflection in architecture, and to just steal from the past and rebuild the past, he thought was just incredibly awful. And he did a talk that then later was published as a book called Ornament and Crime, where he showed that it would be criminal for a designer or an architect to design anything ornamental, to waste the time of the craftsperson with that ornament. Whatever it would be, because it's ornamental, would go out of style, out of fashion quicker, so he just thought it would be criminal. Are there any people here who have tattoos? Please raise your hand if you have a tattoo. So Adolf Loos wrote in Ornament and Crime that you are either degenerate, or if you're not a degenerate, you're very clearly a criminal. And if you haven't committed the crime yet, it's just because you didn't have the time to commit the crime yet, but your mind is very clearly criminal, considering that you would ornament your own body with something as silly as a tattoo. Now, Adolf Loos definitely he did what he wrote. His own Villa Müller outside of Vienna looks like this, and his house on the Michaelerplatz at the time was known in Vienna as the building without eyebrows, because it was so unusual that you would have no ornamentation above the windows. You see the buildings on the left and the right, of course, have ornamentation above it. Apparently, the Austrian Emperor, Kaiser Franz Joseph, had all the windows opposite where he lived at the Hofburg nailed shut to be spared this monstrosity without any ornament, so he wouldn't have had to look at it. Now, if you go to Vienna, this is very much in the very center of Vienna, and you look at that house, you will actually see that it's quite beautiful. This is very, very properly considered. This has fantastic proportions. The stone down here is actually extreme, quite ornamental. It's a beautiful building, and Loos actually left behind a good number of what I would call even masterpieces in Vienna. Now, his book came out, just to give you a couple of dates, in 1910, basically 10 years before the foundation of the Bauhaus. And his book, Ornament and Crime, was a big influence on all of these guys, who again were quite good in leaving behind a couple or a number of masterpieces. And it was really the generation after that, the second and third generation after the giants of modernism, who misunderstood many of their ideas with some sort of economic functionalism, and they covered the world with this pathetic sameness that we still suffer from to this very, very day. Now, obviously, gorgeous, beautiful things have come out of modernism. If I look at this Ellsworth Kelly painting, it is in fact gorgeous. I have a print version of this, somewhat similar, hanging in my office. Or if I look at the Seagram building by Mies van der Rohe on Park Avenue in New York, it is a very well considered and quite beautiful skyscraper. But I also know that for every Seagram building that we are getting, here we also get dozens and dozens of these, like this public housing project just a kilometer away in Queens from the Seagram building. The Soviet Union actually was very successful in creating building factories. These would be mobile factories that they could ship into all of their friendly nations, all over South America, obviously all over Eastern Europe, throughout the Soviet Union. And these things were so efficient and so successful, and because it was a single-minded government, what happened was that in the 1970s, with this system, 250 million apartments were created. If you do the math, an average of 4 persons, 4 people per apartment, that means that you had 1 billion people living in these things in the 1970s. In the 70s, only 5 billion people were alive. So 1/5 of the world population was living in these boxes. And if you look at photographs of the time, what they all did was paint them pink, put little curtains and doilies and things everywhere to individualize these sterile boxes that nobody really wanted to live in. The interesting thing is that these buildings were built under the disguise, under the word of functionalism, but the one thing that they didn't do was to function. So many of them needed to be dynamited 20 years afterwards because people didn't want to live in them. They were not really functioning for human habitation. So how did this happen? That the ideas of an Austrian, a German, and a Swiss guy were able to influence the entire world and determine how we would live and how the world should look like. Well, the Museum of Modern Art in New York, freshly founded, with a freshly founded design and architecture department, delivered the art background and the terminology for it. They called it the international style. So things that used to look like this, what you see here on the left in China, now look like this on the right in Beijing. Stuff that used to look like this in South Africa now look like this in Johannesburg. Things that look like this in Alaska now look like this in Anchorage. And if you just think about it for a second, how is it possible that the same building form should be the ideal building form for the freezing Arctic of Alaska, but somehow also be the ideal form for the incredible heat, let's say, of Istanbul or of Jakarta? It makes no sense whatsoever. On a building like this in Indonesia, the wind could go through. Local possibilities, local climate possibilities were being taken advantage of now, and this sort of was excusable thinking in the 20s because they didn't know any better. Everything should be solved by machines. We don't give a shit if a wind comes from here or from there, it will be solved by an air conditioner. We don't care if it's cold in winter or hot in summer, the heater or the air conditioner will take care of it. By now, of course, we understand and we realize that this sort of thinking is completely energy wasting. It's totally not sustainable. So it's excusable that somebody like Corbusier wouldn't be able to realize the consequences of that sort of idea, but it's absolutely inexcusable when architects are still building like this today. That just makes absolutely no sense to me whatsoever. And this has been the case all over the world. I don't think that there is a single country anywhere that wasn't completely determined by the international style. This was true absolutely everywhere, and it's true for my hometown in Austria, and of course, it's very, very much true also in Portugal. Now, what does that mean for us now? Well, if I take the example of airports and fly, let's say, from Athens to Bangkok, to Sapporo, and back to Sofia, the architecture where I have just landed or taken off gives me no clue of where I could possibly be, in which culture, which country, what sort of neighborhood I am. Actually, the best way to figure out in what country I am is if I try to load up my iPhone, because the one thing that I would actually like to be the same in all of those airports is of course different. Because the electricians never really joined the international style school of thinking. What does that mean locally? So if I take the subway, let's say in Munich, but Munich is just one example. I could have taken any city, anywhere in the world whose subway was built in the second part of the 20th century. So in Munich, if you go from Hauptbahnhof in the Red Line to Karl-Preisplatz, to Theresienstraße, to Messestadt Ost, to Fraunhofer Straße in Giesing, every station will look the same. And I had always assumed that this is the most efficient way. It might not be pretty, but I thought it would be the most efficient way to get me from A to B. It's clear, it's easy to remember, to think that it was done that way because it works the best. And I had thought so until I went to Moscow the first time. In Moscow, on the same line, on the same train, one station looks like this, the next one looks like this. The one after that looks like this, and then the next one looks like this, and the one after that like this. Every station has been designed by a different architect. What that does to you as a Moscow subway rider is that you can actually sit in the Moscow subway, upload your things on Instagram, read a book. You can read Anna Karenina if you so desire, considering you're in Moscow, and you will immediately, automatically realize when your station comes, because the feeling of that station is completely different. You won't have to squint your eye and figure out some shit piece of Helvetica somewhere behind there to see, is it my station? Is it my station? Is it my station? It will, the whole thing is much more intuitive. What I also realized in Moscow, what I saw in Moscow was that in every station there seemed to be people quickly leaving the train, snapping pictures of that station, then immediately coming back into the same train and doing the same thing in the next station again. Because the Moscow subway actually has become a tourist attraction in its own right. I can tell you that when I photographed these pictures in Munich, I was the only one who had a camera out. If we go a little bit further, I spent 2 months ago, I spent some months at the American Academy in Rome. It's an artist residency program, and I had a fantastic time in Rome. Before that, just before that, we opened the beauty show, and I'll come back to that in a second, in a museum in Frankfurt that was designed by a famous American architect, and I'll show you. So in Rome, every regular building, so like that's a very typical Roman building, and I didn't pick a particularly beautiful one, basically just any. But what happens is that this building, I think, is decently good looking. It's also decently good looking if it's in not such good shape, if some graffiti is on it, if it has been overpainted. It still is pretty good looking. If it's covered with stuff, it's still a fine building. And even if it's in really bad shape, it's still pretty good looking. Now, the museum that we had the beauty show in Frankfurt, designed by Richard Meyer, I think it's not a bad building at all. It's a fine building. But it cannot have any patina at all. This building was repainted completely and renovated 3 years ago. And you can see now it already starts to look bad again. Its very foundation, like its very idea, It has to be in its newest, best shape at all times. And I think this is not a good idea. A building that by design cannot age, is not allowed to age, is not a good idea. From a practical point of view, it's awful. A good part of the budget that this museum would normally spend on creating new exhibitions now has to be spent to constantly renovate the building. There is a Richard Meyer building in Rome also, where of course they don't have the money to really repaint that thing every 2 or 3 years. So what they do there is they only repaint it until here. So now above it, it's kind of off-white, creamy white, and below it, it's totally white. So it's sort of this duotone building in Rome right now. And in the studio, Jessica and I realized this and basically started to take form more seriously. Also because we found that whenever we did, the things seemed to work much better. That the results just worked better, and I'll give you a couple of quick examples. This is one that we just finished a couple of weeks ago. It's a wall that goes around the public housing project in Vienna. It's a long wall, it's half a mile or half a kilometer long, and there was some very bad sort of like empty their own neighbors little graffitis on it, so they wanted to do something with the wall in order to basically prevent that. And we, Jessica wrote a whole, which I think a wonderful text that all has to do with water, because that this whole public housing development is close to or is named after and close to an artificial lake. Or another example, a underpass of the Brooklyn-Queens Expressway in Dumbo, an area that used to be quite industrial, now is quite gentrified with a lot of bars, restaurants, office spaces, as well as condominiums around. And this underpass didn't really matter before, but now there are a lot of people are living there and a lot of people are going to work there. People minded that it stank really badly because guys peed in there. It's not a very good looking underpass, so guys coming out of bars at night peed in there. And our client said, do something. There wasn't the budget was very small, so we didn't, it was clear we could possibly only paint, but we didn't want to make a sign that says, dear guys, do not pee here. But so we wound up actually just painting a fairly intricate yes on one side of the underpass and a more graphic yes on the other side of the underpass, basically so that people who would go through as pedestrians would have something to look at, more intricate, and people who would drive through by car would also have something to look at. And because it says in very large letters, yes, on this underpass, what happened was that newly married couples start to get their marriage photos taken in front of that yes. So with one lick of paint, we were able to transform this toilet into a marrying chapel. If you look at, or if you're looking for a definition of beauty, this is a very simple one that makes a lot of sense to me. It's simply just a combination of shape, form, color, composition, material, and structure that work together to please the aesthetic senses, particularly or especially the eye. Now, you can actually see what results beauty has, not only, and I'll come to that, from a personal point of view, that you actually feel better and behave better in a beautiful environment. It also works from a financial point of view. things that are beautiful are actually more lucrative. And this is not just an opinion that I tell you, this is actually provable. So there is a design management institute in Boston. They put a panel together of experts that looked through the S&P 500, the 500 largest companies in the United States, and they selected 16 companies that they thought were involved in making things and acting in a beautiful manner. So basically, the companies, 16 companies where aesthetics played a big role in. They came up with a list of these 16 companies. You may agree or not agree, but this list of experts thought that these companies in the United States were on top of taking aesthetics seriously. And then they just looked at how did these companies perform in the stock market compared to the regular S&P 500, compared to the average of everybody else. And they outperformed the average by more than double. So if you had your stock in any company that had aesthetics, where aesthetics played a role, you did more than double as good as with a regular company. 4 reasons why I think this is important. Number 1, it is not on the surface. It is completely in us. It is part of who we are. And I'll show it to you. The tool that we've used the longest in human history is the stone axe. We started using it 1 million years ago, which is more remarkable when you think that we've only been Homo sapiens for 200,000 years. So we've only been properly human for 200,000 years, but already 800,000 years before that, we started to use this tool. And every one of those tools is perfectly symmetrical. They've been found by the hundreds of thousands on all continents, everywhere in the world. So many of them have been found that I bought one recently for $200 on eBay. I brought it to a curator at the Museum of Natural History in New York, and she said, yeah, that's totally the real thing. There's just so many of these things around. From a functioning point of view, there is no reason for this perfect symmetry. You could have killed that saber-toothed tiger just as well with any sharp stone. You didn't need to have that perfect symmetry in there. We made that thing symmetrical because we thought it's better looking that way. Stones have been found that are 8 meters high. There is nothing you can do with an 8-meter high stone. This stone has a functionality of 0. There is absolutely nothing you can do with it. This was probably made because somebody wanted to impress a partner. I mean, look at this beautiful thing. I made it. I must be great. Oh, do you want to go out tonight? We very much likely learned from this guy. If you think of the peacock and his incredibly long feathers, what an unbelievable difficulty he had burdened himself with by growing his feathers so beautiful and so long. I mean, the guy has difficulty walking, he can hardly fly, and I would say if I would be a peacock, and the international symbol for the World Wildlife Fund is actually hunting me down and eating me, I'd say maybe I overdid it a little bit with my desire for beauty. Maybe I should take, by the time a vegetarian animal is hunting me down, maybe I should take that as a sign that I took it a step too far. But the fact remains that getting the best peahen is a larger advantage for the peacock than the disadvantage of being eaten by the vegetarian. So beauty remains ruling large. Number 2, as we saw with the colors and the forms from the beginning of the talk, there is an agreement of what we think is beautiful and not. Roughly, it's about 50%. 50%, the other 50% is of course individual, depending on how much have we seen, how much do we know, in what situation, in what context do we see it, and how do we feel when we see it. But the other 50%, there is an agreement. I have a friend, a psychologist in the UK who has worked all his life in aesthetics, Chris McManus, and he was nice enough to borrow a test that he has developed. So Chris tests with Mondrian. Now one of these Mondrians is the real thing, it's an actual Mondrian composition. The other Mondrian is faked by Chris. Let's see this. Who thinks that the Mondrian on your left is real? Who thinks the Mondrian on your right is real? Wow, this is a pretty flawless answer. Everybody thinks the Mondrian on your right is real. Let's check this out. Yes, you are correct. Again, I've done this in Tokyo. I've done this in Colombia, Latin America. I've done this in Stockholm. Pretty much every audience, it's rare that the audience is as perfect as you. Normally about 15% go wrong, but 85% get this. Now Mondrian, as we know, did not work with the golden means. That's why it's culturally agnostic. He didn't care about the golden means. What we do know, because we can x-ray his paintings, is that he moved those lines around endlessly until he wound up with a composition that he felt of was the right composition, that was a pleasing composition. And very clearly, you all in this room, and I think you all in this room, realized what is a pleasing composition and what isn't. So there is disagreement. That also means there is hope for designers, that it makes sense to go after creating something beautiful, because there will be people who will share this and who will actually appreciate the beauty that we create. But you can also see it in a much easier, more common ground. There's travel magazines around the world, they do surveys with their readers. One of the survey questions very often is, what is your favorite large city? What is your favorite metropolis anywhere in the world? And if you look at all of the results of all the surveys from the different travel magazines from the different continents, it's by and large the same 10 cities that wind up in the top 10. Lisbon sometimes also winds up in the top 10, sometimes it doesn't, but by and large, it's these 10. Now, I've actually been to all those 10 cities, and I would agree with the readers of the travel magazines, these are 10 gorgeous cities. It also seems that whenever I go to any of these places, all the people from all the ugly places from around the world also had the same idea or have been attracted by the beauty of these places, and ironically bring the beauty down by just overpopulating them. And I would think that you have a taste of this in your own beautiful city. You know what I'm talking about, and I'm convinced that moving forward into the future, we will have to come up with a solution for this. You know, places like Barcelona or let's say Amsterdam. None of my friends in those places live in the beautiful areas of those cities anymore. They all moved out into industrial areas, and I don't think that that is fair or proper, that the citizens of a beautiful city have to move into the ugly places to make space for the tourists or for the people who live in ugly places all year long. We'll have to come up with some sort of idea for that. Number 3, Beauty actually changes how we feel. You probably have an inkling of that, but I can actually prove it to you. So, there's a New England Complex Systems Institute. They look at they work with Twitter, and they look at it from a geographical point of view. They have a little algorithm that can decide which tweet is positive, which tweet is negative. If there are more positive than negative tweets, the area on the map is colored green. If there are more negative than positives, the area is colored red. For those of you who have visited New York, you know that there are two train stations in New York. One is Grand Central, looks like this. The other one, also important but very different look, is Pennsylvania Station. Looks like this. Now, if you look at the map from the Institute, Pennsylvania Station is always red, Grand Central is always green. But on your next New York visit, make it a sport. It's a 20-minute brisk walk between the two stations. Visit them. Doesn't matter or both of them are open 24 hours. Doesn't matter which time of day or night. You will feel it immediately. You won't need the scientific proof on it. The mood in Penn Station is always terrible. People are really shitty. There is more regression. There's more garbage everywhere. The mood in Grand Central is always much better. I'm not saying that everybody is happy, but you'll feel the difference between the two stations immediately. If we look at some of the individual tweets, this one from Grand Central, or this one from Penn Station. Or as a proof that beauty does not only change the way we feel, but it also does change the way that we behave. You can look at this tweet from Penn Station. People simply don't do this in Grand Central. It's the architecture that brings out that kind of behavior. Number 4, we've worked for the exhibition, but also for the book, quite closely together with a scientist in Vienna. His name is Dr. Helmut Leder, who's running one of the largest institutes for aesthetics in psychology anywhere in the world. And one of the many results that come out of his extensive research is a piece of data that comes out of his research with Alzheimer patients. So he works with Alzheimer patients that have the advanced kind of that disease. They live in special homes. You see here on the left is a regular brain, on the right is a brain that has Alzheimer's, so you can see even the biological difference between those two brains. And Dr. Leder goes into these homes and he says, he picks a patient and he says, let's play a little game, let's do a test. And he shows the patient, he shows them 6 different images. And Dr. Leder says, pick the one that you think is the most beautiful, and the second one, and the third one, and 4, and so on. And the patient has no problem putting them into a lineup from the most beautiful to what they think is the least beautiful. Dr. Leder says goodbye and leaves. 2 weeks later, he comes back. Now the patient has no idea that he met before. Like, these are patients who wouldn't recognize their own children. So he has no idea that he actually met Dr. Leder before. He has no idea he ever played this test before. And Dr. Leder says, well, he introduces himself again. And he says, let's do this test. Please pick the most beautiful one, second most beautiful one, and third most beautiful one. The patient puts it in the exact same lineup that he did 2 weeks earlier. So even when most of our brain functions are gone, our sense for beauty remains intact. It's very much proof that this is deeply part of us. It's deep inside us. It's very much part of what it means to be human. Why should we care? Well, if we go back to the housing part that was literally just created for functioning only, we know that if beauty would have been part of the design of this piece of housing would still stand now because people would have enjoyed living there more. Now, the equivalent of the social housing from the 70s really now would be the surfaces of social media companies online. If you look, what you see here is on the left is Airbnb, so a hotel-like thing. In the middle you see Etsy, which is a craft store. On the right you see Facebook, social media, of course. All of them take their visual clues exactly out of a book that was written in 1927 by a German guy called Jan Tschichold. Now, Jan Tschichold was a giant of modern typography. He was a fantastic thinker, and he was a very smart man. Which is probably also why he wrote an essay against his own book in the 1950s, where he described the ideas of die neue Typografie as narrow-minded and even as fascist. But it was too late. Designers had loved the grid and the white space and the sans serif typography so much that even the guy who showed them how to do it couldn't take it away again. The thing with this functionalism is, it's so popular because it's so unbelievably easy to do. All those idiots out there who say, oh wow, I'm not about beauty, I'm a problem solver. Fuck you. Those problems are so unbelievably easy to solve, it's a joke. If your problem is to design a chair and it doesn't matter how good or bad that chair is from a formal point of view, I can design 100 chairs before this talk is over. I know the ideal seating height, I know the exact ideal angle of the backrest, and I can do one in Baroque, and I can do one in Vienna 1900, and I'll do an Art Deco one, and I'll do this one and that one. And it's so super easy. The same is true for some magazine layout, or the same is true for some social media layout. These problems are really, really easy to solve. What is difficult, and what would be unbelievably difficult, is to create a Facebook page that's actually beautiful. That still works in exactly the same way, so the functionality obviously is important. If it doesn't function, it's normally not designed. But it has to go beyond that. It has to do more than just function. Because as we've seen with the social housing projects, if all it does is to function, it doesn't really function very, very well. Now, the original giants of modernism knew that. Max Bill, probably the single most famous Bauhaus alumni, wrote this in the 1950s. It has become clear that beauty has to be put on the same level as function in order to create good work, because of course beauty is a function too. And this really is true for pretty much anything. If you look at these really non-spaces that our world is completely dealing with, underneath bridges, stuff that can actually be improved with some love and attention, but shouldn't have to be improved. It should be good to start out with. Which brings us really back to the beginning of the talk into Adolf Loos. because he was the first to really realize that all this ornament might be superfluous. He was also the first to realize that this complete negation of ornament was a mistake. In the 1930s, he turned against some people of the Bauhaus. He thought that the Bauhaus had made an ornament out of the non-ornament, which was really a fake ornament and the worst kind of ornament. An ornament that pretended to be not a non-ornament, but was ornamental nevertheless. And he designed a series of glasses for an Austrian company called Lobmeier, and who has been producing this series of glasses since the 1930s in the same way, and they're still producing them today. And I would say that a reasonable person could say this is a beautiful set of glasses. And when Adolf Loos delivered these glasses to the company Lobmeier, the glasses were accompanied by a letter in which he writes that he could also see in the future some ornaments being added on these glasses, like the nude human figure, like small animals, like insects and such. And sometimes happenstance is just so gorgeous. So the company Lobmeier called up my company, Sagmeister and Walsh in New York, and commissioned from us to design the ornaments that would go onto the glasses that were designed by the author of Ornament and Crime. And of course, we absolutely loved that assignment, and we created a set of 14 glasses, 7 with the 7 deadly sins. So you have gluttony, lust, pride, wrath, sloth, and avarice. And then we had the 7 heavenly features. And if you are invited to dinner and the host gives you that gluttony glass, you can wonder if she did that on purpose or if it was just another piece of happenstance. So in conclusion, the question really is not one between simplicity and maximal design, or between minimalism and baroqueness. The question really is what is between caring and non-caring. 99% of everything that's ugly in this world is ugly not because somebody wanted it to be ugly, it's ugly because somebody didn't give a shit. Somebody needed something. They needed a discount furniture store. They needed a fast food outlet. They needed a this or a that, and it was built because we needed it, and anything beyond that didn't really matter. As I said, we have a beauty show touring through Europe. It started in Vienna. It's on the second iteration. It was in Frankfurt in that white building. It's doing extremely well. People are very, very much interested in this subject. In the first 2 stops alone, we already had 250,000 visitors. So very, very clearly, people out there, even people who normally don't go to museums, are very much interested in this subject. Among many other things, we try to basically show that we can create something beautiful with things that are not beautiful per se, in this case, white garbage bags and little ventilators, as you find them in computers that blow up and inflate and deflate those bags. There is a big blue round mattress underneath that you can look at it, and there's a surprising meditative Zen feeling achieved through those garbage bags. We asked the same questions I asked you of course, in the museum we have much more time, so we have a whole bunch of these walls where people decide or vote for their favorite color, their favorite landscapes, and so forth. and so on, with their entry ticket that consists out of cardboard coins that allows you to vote, and then behind the wall you see how other people voted, and you can compare your own vote against everybody else. Now, I do believe that things actually become better. There is signs pretty much anywhere that we are now already realizing our mistaken thinking from the second part of the 20th century, and we're moving on. A very clear sign of this is if you look at all the books that have been digitized by Google. Millions and millions of books have been digitized, and if you look at how often, in what years when these books were written, is the word beauty being mentioned. And you see it plays a very big role. All here, 1760, 1800, throughout the 19th century, it goes down. In the 20th century, goes radically down in the second half of the 20th century, but now it actually does come back up. Things really do become better again. We are definitely on our way into positive things. And then if you look at the definition that I showed you in the very, very beginning of this talk, it's, yes, it's a combination of things that play a role in sight, but also in hearing. And we'll go in sight and in hearing, and I'll show you, and then let's just see that I can do this. Yes, I can. Okay. So we'll try an experiment. Can I all ask you to come up? I've had a band that I got to know through the Happyphone that scored the Happyphone. I've had them write a song for us called The Beauty Song. We collaborated on the lyrics. Half of them were written by the band, half by me. It's a song you've never heard of, but we prepared the lyrics karaoke style, so you can see them coming up. And the way this would work is only if you completely lie into it. If you go and you just sing a little bit like, it's not gonna work. Like imagine that you have a 3-year-old niece and it's her birthday. And your niece doesn't care if you sing wrong or if you're out of tune. Your niece just cares about the enthusiasm in which you sing happy birthday for. This is how you have to sing. Now, I asked the singer of the band to hum the melody beforehand so that you get at least an idea of the melody. And I'll play the melody. Try this.
Fell asleep. Real. Ornaments ain't no sin.
Well, the question is, do you really like your niece? It wasn't bad, but I think you can do quite a bit better. So we start again with so real. So real. Shout it out from New York to Berlin. information that was not very fair. But I thank you anyway. If you want to see something beautiful every day, I post one thing that I think is beautiful or something that can be improved to be beautiful once a day. It's an easy address to follow. And I think we're doing some questions, no?
Yes, but first of all, you have very inspiring. E sim, agora temos aqui algum tempo para perguntas, por isso sinto